Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the poem of the day for today, Thursday, September the 11th, 2025. We're going to continue today in our series of Shakespearean sonnets, reading from the Shakespeare Sonnets and Poems, the Folger edition that I talked about how much I loved yesterday. Today we're going to read Sonnet 2, and Sonnet 2 falls within two categories, a category within a category. The first is it's part of the first 120 or so that are addressed to the fair young man. And it's also within the first 17 or so that talk to the fair young man about the importance of having a child, trying to convince him to reproduce and have a child. And so within this sonnet, number 2, the speaker is asking the young man to imagine two futures, one in which he has a child and one in which he doesn't, and to do a sort of compare and contrast, as if to say which future do you wish to inhabit and which would be better for you and why. Obviously trying to push him toward one direction, and that direction is having a child. This poem, as far as I can tell, is pretty consistent structurally in ways that the sonnet yesterday was not. So I was able to spend a lot of time yesterday talking about the ways in which Shakespeare was breaking his own rules. I'm not going to do so today because I think this one is much more consistent, although there's a couple tweaks here and there. Instead, I'm going to talk more about the idea that's expressed through the content. So this is Sonnet number 2 by William Shakespeare. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed, of small worth held. Then being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelst it cold. My apologies for butchering line 12 there. That was a tough one for me. And in making an excuse for myself, that's actually the one place where I've recognized that Shakespeare used a trochaic substitution like we talked about yesterday. So most of the lines are in iambic pentameter. They're iambs of unstressed, stressed. But I believe that line 12 begins with the trochee, proving his beauty by succession thine. That's how I'm reading that one. Proving rather than proving. And that might have been cause for my fumble, or it could simply be that I made a mistake and I'm tired. So this poem, as you can hear, through the first 3 stanzas establishes a problem and then gives 2 variants on it, and then in the couplet gives a solution to that problem. Again, this is a couplet that sums up rather than that offers a second volta or a second turn. And at the beginning, the poet is expressing to the fair youth 40 years from now, or maybe even just 40 years period. There's a reading of this where he's suggesting that being 40 years old is old, which I think we should take issue with, but perhaps he's saying 40 years from now. When the winters besiege thy brow, so that's metaphorical language that's personifying the winter, suggesting that it can sort of launch an attack or an assault upon your brow, causing you wrinkles there. And it'll dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field. So again, we have a metaphor in here that the beauty is like a long field, and the 40 winters, so the 40 years from now, the time is going to kind of carve out these trenches, these divots, and those would be wrinkles and lines on one's face. That thy youth's proud livery, and livery The connotation is, the denotation is distinctive clothing or a military uniform. So thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. It seems, though, that he's still, although the weed refers also to garment, it has a wordplay there on field. So I think he's still actually speaking about the natural beauty and not actually about clothing here, although he's using the language of clothing, which might suggest that he thinks that physical attractiveness and beauty is something that you wear until you wear it out or you wear it thin and then you have to discard it and get something new, almost like a kind of molting that someone might go through. And then in the second quatrain, he says, someone's going to ask you where your beauty is. What happened to the treasure of all your lusty days? And the lusty has a denotation of strong and vigorous, but it is a wordplay of lustful. So in a sense, he's saying, what happened to the benefits? Someone will ask you, what happened to the benefits of those days when you were young and attractive and could go out and hook up and sow your wild oats, so to speak. And he says that one option is you'll say with deep sunken eyes and all eating shame, a thriftless praise. Cooper's joined us again. In other words, imagine that you have nothing to give for it, nothing to say for it. You're all alone and you're by yourself and you got nothing out of all that youth. Or how much more praise would be deserved if your beauty's use, if you could answer, it's this fair child of mine, is the sum, and my old excuse, meaning it excuses my old age. It's okay that I'm old and ugly now because I have this beautiful young child. And that line 12 says, proving his beauty by succession 9. So this young child that you're going to have will inherit your beauty and your attractiveness, and that will justify your life and your old age and your being ugly now. And the couplet, this were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelst cold. So both in the sense of reinvigorate and re-enliven you when you feel cold, but also you will live on when your blood runs cold and you're dead in the ground, you will live on through your progeny. Now, I have to take some issue with what's being expressed in this poem, just in the sense that it's relying so heavily upon the future at the expense of the present. And it's saying that it's putting a lot of emphasis, a lot of weight upon someone's physical beauty and not a sense of a internal beauty or a beautiful soul. And it's also imagining that when you become older and you lose what we associate as youthful physical attractiveness, that you're going to be useless, that you're going to be miserable, that you're going to have to justify your existence. And so the poet, the speaker in here, doesn't really imagine a older person having use to the society except for propagating the species. And not just that, but having a beautiful child. Not just that you'll be measured by the quality of the person that you produce, but just make sure that they inherit your beauty. And I know that sonnets a lot of the time are in praise of beauty, but this sonnet participates in, or could be critiqued by, the theorist Lee Edelman, who's a philosopher and a teacher now. I think he's in his 70s, but he wrote this book called No Future, and it's Queer Theory and Radical Politics, might be the subtitle. I don't recall at the moment, but what he's critiquing in there is a way of dealing with the present that puts an imagination upon the future, wherein the future is ensured by the existence of children, by reproducing and by having babies. So the only purpose of ensuring a good world now is for those young people yet to come. And he sees this in a lot of stories and in a lot of films, that the promise of the future is that there's this baby at the end, and that the only way we can imagine futures through narratives is, oh, well, the people in the future don't deserve what we're doing right now. And this is something we hear, I think, a lot with discussion of climate. And there's certainly an ethic to that, right? That you don't want people to inherit a bad world. But I think Edelman's critique is that was part of this normalizing attempt, especially within the 90s and the early 2000s, of sort of assimilationist politics from the LGBTQ community, where they were trying to say, we can get married, we can adopt children, we can be good parents, all of which are true. But Edelman was arguing in his book that there's another way of looking at the value of the present and what should be placed as a priority in terms of building a future. And he actually wanted LGBTQ people to reject those kind of heteronormative markers of success within culture. And he said that the queer person should then embrace the death drive, in the sort of Freudian Lacanian sense. All of that is just to say, I think if we put a little bit of an Edelman lens on as we're reading Sonnet number 2, we can see that it not only limits the praise and beauty of a single person towards merely their physical attractiveness, and a physical attractiveness that's not in the eye of the beholder, but one that is discussed as being objective and having an expiration date upon it, that beauty is only associated with youth, but also then that the worth of a person and the worth of the present moment is only contingent upon their ability to produce children, propagate the species, but also make sure that your children are also beautiful. And I think that's just kind of a myopic way of seeing things. It's a limited way of seeing things that doesn't really celebrate the dignity of all other people. Perhaps I'm taking the sonnet too seriously, and perhaps it's actually intended to be a bit satirical or ironic or tongue-in-cheek. And if it is, that's being lost on me at the moment. But that was a lens that I wanted to apply to the poem this time, as opposed to looking at it strictly through a stylistic lens. I think that's the end of my observations for today, my analysis for today. And I hope you enjoyed the video. It was a little bit different this time, but we'll continue with another Shakespearean sonnet tomorrow. And in the meantime, I wish you peace.